My name is Frank Taylor, Project Director of the Oral History of Criminology and Criminal Justice. I'm speaking to you today from Chicago, Illinois. The date is November 21st, 1996. Today, we're privileged to be able to interview Marshal Clinard.
Well, I'm Paul Friday, and I'm one of Marshall's students who started in the late 1960s, and this is Professor Marshal Clinard, who is well known for a variety of things. But from my perspective, Marshal, the one thing that is known about you, personally and as a scholar, is that you are constantly on the go. You travel this world from Afghanistan to Europe to Cambodia to Africa, and that not only do you travel it, but you have written works that are both from the developed countries and the underdeveloped countries. How did you start to get involved internationally when no one else was doing it?
Well, the whole thing is relatively simple. When I was, must have been about 17, 18 I guess it was, in college, I encountered Edgar Hewitt, that turned out to be the leading archaeologist of New Mexico and of the Southwest archaeology. He came to our university and gave a talk. I'd had a course in anthropology, and off I went on. He had an idea of a archaeological and anthropological field school in New Mexico, as run by the University of New Mexico. So I went out to study one summer on the Jemez Plateau, Pueblo Indians, went to their dances. I was 18. I went back when I was 19 and lived the whole summer with the Navajo Indians excavating Chaco Canyon, in one of the ruins at Chaco Canyon in northern New Mexico. And the world never was the same after that. I remember the pictures, photographs I had. I used to show people like I do a foreign country now, and it was very much. So I lived on the Navajo reservation back in the early 30s, and it left an impact that stayed with me forever. So that started it, and then later came invitations to do this and whatever it was. One time go to Africa, I took that up. Another time to Sweden, I took that up. And in addition, I'm a sociologist, and I can't understand sociologists why they don't all travel, because we get so much out of watching other people and their customs than, for example, if I were an economist or a person in the humanities and so on. So that's part of it, how you get started.
Now, when I first came to study with you, you had just returned from India, and you were finishing the book on slums and community development. What attracted you to India, and what relationship does that have to the criminological works that you've done internationally since then?
Well, I went with the Ford Foundation to India as advisor to the government of India, an attempt to try to change the slums of India, the worst probably in the world, by self-help, not by philanthropy, the rich, nor contributions, nor by the government efforts, but to get them doing themselves. And the whole idea of self-help, of trying to take care of yourself, I was very much influenced in accepting it by the work of Shaw and McKay and Saul Alinsky in Chicago, and the so-called Chicago area projects and Back of the Yards movement, where they try to get local areas to try to change the problem of crime. And in the case of India, it shifted to sanitation, health, and improvement economically and all of it by their own efforts. So that's what it is. Actually, it not directly tied to crime. I got the ideas partly from that, from self-help stuff, but I did give some lectures. I remember I talked to the college that gave that trained the people who could run the Indian prisons. I gave them lectures occasionally in criminology, and I also worked with some other areas. But I did not go there for criminology. But curiously, a lot of my interest was derived from criminology.
Now you were the very first Fulbright scholar in criminology to go to Sweden. Is that right?
Well, I was one of the first 3 Fulbright scholars that they ever had in Sweden. Didn't have many after us. Money came from As I recall, the money came from World War II, some kind of thing. It was building an embassy. They built an embassy, and they had money left over. They gave it, because Sweden was a neutral, gave it to them for to have a few scholars. There were just 3 of us to begin with, and I went there in criminology. That's right.
Now, did this experience in Sweden have anything to do with you ultimately going to Switzerland for your book on Swiss crime?
I suppose. I went to Sweden partly. Here was the model country of the Western world, the ideal country and everything, but I had heard that it had a reasonably high crime rate. And this fascinated me. A country, I was interested in Sweden, but the welfare state and all of its economic thing, because I never did believe that economic factors were very important in crime anyway, as a cause of crime. And therefore, yes, it did. It certainly, I was intrigued by it. On the same time, I went to Switzerland because it reportedly had a low crime rate. So in both of the cases, there was an interest in that way.
Well, your book on Swiss crime has certainly captured, and it still continues to have some debate about it. You were unique in that book in the variety of measures that you used. How did you approach it theoretically and methodologically?
Well, I probably answer exactly, but it's one of the more of the studies I've done. I found this one of the most, how I use the word, challenging, because you see, I'd got a National Science Foundation to go to Switzerland, which was reported to have a very low crime rate, and I was to find out about that low crime rate and also what was the explanation of it. So off I go, and when I arrive, what to my amazement, that they don't have national statistics amount to anything. The only thing they had was convictions in the court and things of that type, conviction. The reason they didn't have national police statistics or national crimes reported to the police is the cantons have always been very jealous and suspicious of the federal government. If the federal government knew that this canton had a high crime rate or had this many police or this and that, there might be some repercussions on that in terms of appropriations and all that. So secrecy was the most safe thing for a canton. So I was faced with a problem. Here I'm over here to do this study, and where am I going to get it? So then I decided I'd have to do my own measures. And so I used to think around, how would you measure a country's crime rate if you didn't have official statistics much? And so I had an idea what it would take. We'd get insurance rate. We'd find insurance rates of other countries in Europe for burglary and larceny. What were the rates, auto theft? And then I had an idea that if a crime was a problem, they'd be talking about it in Parliament. So we studied parliamentary debates, but it didn't show much in the way of any interest in crime whatsoever. And then I analyzed the newspapers. It turned out bulk of the crime in the newspapers was but somebody who lived outside the country who'd come in and committed the crime, or was a crime committed in another country. And then we tried a variety of other measures, and including one of the first that's ever done in Europe, a victimization survey, which was done in Zurich, which caused a lot of work on my part because they never had anything experienced like this, and though I had to work a good deal in terms of setting up our questions and all that. So then I had another one. How are you going to know that it's even if you found it is low? So then I got them to do the victimization of the studies in Freiburg, Germany. So we could compare that with Zurich. So again, it was a very thing. It merely showed that you can, on my judgment, and of course eventually I did some police studies in certain cantons, but you can do a study, in my judgment, of whether a country has a low or a high crime rate if you sit around and think of some other measures of measuring it.
Mm-hmm. No, it was certainly a significant contribution, as was, of course, your crime in developing countries. In fact, that book stands alone even to this day. And again, this is one of the things that intrigues me is you have this interest in developed and underdeveloped. What took you to Africa?
Well, what took me to Africa is simply, remember now, I was professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Rockefeller had through our international setup at the university where we have so many kind of handles this type of thing, wanted someone to go there and become a visiting professor at the university. It was in Uganda because Makerere University, which is the name of a hill, was the outstanding university. It was just before I got there, it is affiliate. Well, really, the main university was in University of London and Oxford. No, yeah, either Oxford, University of London, and the leading one in West Africa, British, was Ibadan. So I went there primarily, rather curiously, to help them with maybe research methods, but mainly to introduce an American type of graduate and undergraduate education. The British style is more just lecture notes, no challenge the professor, and all that type of thing. And but of course, I took it primarily with the idea that I was going to make a study of crime, which I did. And I trained one of my graduate students with me. We trained, I think, a group of about, 15 Africans in research methods, etc. They became my research assistants on the crime and development project. Just parenthetically, if you were doing research in a developing country, the thing is, it goes for any country. I don't care what country it is. You got to keep your mouth shut. I always told them. I mean, if you're there to do a piece of study of crime, you don't get in anything else. I always remember we gathered our statistics a great deal in Kampala, the capital, from police stations. This, by the way, was just before Amin came in. Abodi was then the head of the country. And I had been to police stations myself and had heard screams from people being beaten in the police station, get some confession out of them. I one time was talking to a head of one of the substations, and then came a guy groveling on the floor, right in the room where I was talking to the head of the police. He was all blood all over him, and he just was running in there on the floor. Of course, I said nothing. I remember I told all my research assistants, this is an example, and then we did the study in the prison. I said, we're here to do research on whether the crime rate is high, what kind of it is, and you are just to not keep your mouth shut and not to be upset by what you see. I think it's very important when you do research in another country, regardless of your political belief, you're a humanitarian, you keep your mouth shut. If you want to talk about it later, it's all right after you've left the country.
Okay. What are the current issues that you think still need to be studied? What kind of recommendations would you make to young scholars in terms of where to look for their research?
Well, I think if you're not, if you don't willing to put up with a bit of hardship, if you're not interested in using some ingenuity, if you're not interested in following the customs of the country, the problem of you after all are a guest in the country with it. I always remembered in Uganda that it was essential to deal with the African elite, the head of the Division of Corrections, the head of the CID, the Intelligence Division, all of it. Any of those people that, even though I wore a bush shirt and was very informally dressed, I always dressed to the maximum when I saw them. That was an expression of my respect for them. It also was to show them that I thought that I showed them they're important. I always remember things like that. Time and again, I tried to always play the culture of the country, which was so on and so on. So those are some other things. I think you don't need trying it unless you really like to work in a foreign situation and are willing to do it. The language thing, of course, is not a problem. Was not a problem in there because English in say East Africa. On the other hand, I took one of my graduate students with me who got his doctoral dissertation. He learned to speak Swahili. It's good if you can learn it. In Switzerland, unfortunately, I read languages. I don't speak them. I had 3 research assistants, one that all were capable of speaking in French and German. But I did a lot of it in English. Language is a problem in what country you go to as to whether either if you can't do it, you got enough money to get assistantships to do it. Yeah.
Again, when I first studied with you, you were one of a handful of internationally known criminologists, and the early American Society of Criminology meetings were relatively small. We've got over 2,000 people from 50 different countries here right now. To what do you attribute the increase in the interest in international and comparative research today?
That'd be a tough one. I'd have to really make a study of that one, but I do think that travel has become far cheaper and easier, and more the television and others have made, and the United Nations and the situations and crises, the number of foreign students who come to the United States to study has exposed people to others. I can tell you that while I've been many times to India, and in January I go 15th trip to India, I never saw a sari, a woman in a sari, until after World War II. I never saw anything. In fact, except for Chinese, some Japanese in the United States, we never saw anything, even the universities. I think foreign students have a lot with it, the television, the cheapness with which people can travel abroad, and then, of course, the whole recognition in the third world has become something which was only in the travel books years ago, and nobody cared anything about them. I suppose the independence of the countries of the third world has again made us conscious. As long as they're part of the British-French Empire, I don't think we were conscious very much of that whole world that was out there. Those aren't quite the answer, but there's
it's interesting.
Why we got it in. Now, in criminology, I think there's just been a trend to realize that that most criminological work is a national criminology. The Swedes study the Swedish crime, the Italians study the Italian crime, the French study the French crime, and they're all nationalistic, often have their own explanation, like the Italians have leaned towards biological and psychological. I think they recognize that crime occurs in all countries, and that somehow or other, how you explain that one place and one another, and why it's high in one and why it's low in another. I suppose it's communication, rapid stuff have come in, information they hear, like I heard that Switzerland had a low one, I heard that Sweden had a high one, and I guess that all of this is now, I think now that we're not an island, and to use that phrase, an island to itself. We realize that other countries, for example, the situation in our country with Canada. Canada seems to have a much lower crime rate. A city like Toronto is nothing like our big cities, and so I think we get intrigued as to why it is. So I think that increases the research. Unfortunately, in these areas, the funds are not very numerous. Like I've studied corporate crime, and there's very little funds there. Most of it is directed within the own country. The funds I'm talking about.
Okay, well, to follow this a little bit more, what are the issues that you think need to be done internationally in terms of research? I mean, where would you go at this point? Where would you recommend people to look if they wanted to do something as cutting edge as you did when you started doing your work?
Well, I think the direction started on a large scale through something it seemed. We know that national statistics are not much good. They vary about reporting the crime. They vary about how well they keep the records. Some of it is faked by the local police and so on. Now we have the victimization surveys now, where people report whether they're a victim of crime. We have now, I think, one of the recent one is of some 10 studies, and it confirms my Swiss study, because the Swiss are the lowest, I think, in this comparative study. Martin Kilius and Ingrid Tass and others have been involved in this kind of thing. I think, of course, that's one thing for us to be able to show that some are lower and what the type of crime is and all that. But I think that more research on the factors that really account for this. It isn't that there are low rates or low rates for a type of crime. That's better than total. But again, what are the factors within it? For example, like we've studied alcohol drinking and alcoholism. We know that a country like Finland has a very high rate. It's part of the culture, part of the life. Other societies don't have that, like India, where it would be obviously low in those areas because of Hindu views of alcohol. I think we got to find out why it is, and that's when my Swiss study, I tried to find out, not just finally established they did have a low crime rate. There was some kind of a Danish study that came out. We got a name called the White Knights, which was a bunch of, as the Danes scholars themselves say, a bunch of nonsense. It's just done purely poor research statistic, but criticize the Swiss supposedly low crime rate. But again, you see the victimization surveys show it's still the lowest of the lot after all this years. But I do think we got to go into the factors, and in Switzerland, the study, I tried to explain why Swiss crime rate is low. So I think that the next step beyond the statistical part is we've got to understand why. Now this requires, I myself am very partial to outside people making that type of study. I'm not too sure that people within the culture, I believe in that we may have to rely a great deal on people from another culture studying the crime rate of that culture, provided we get a research grant. But I would think that even in the government, has the money, it might be well to import a criminologist, somebody from another country, to study why their crime is high, why it is low. We have a great tradition in this country, and still the greatest work ever made on race relations in the United States was Myrdal, An American Dilemma. Myrdal was a Swede. He came to the United States and had some people with him from there to make a study of what our race relations situation from a country that was virtually devoid of it. From a race relations situation in Sweden. I have a feeling the other way. In other words, I think I can look at another country, whether it's India, Sweden, or India, or Switzerland, or Sweden, a little more objectively. But whether countries will employ outside people to find out, we're not about statistics now, we're talking about why. And they look at it differently. Everyone looks at a different country.
So that would be one argument you'd make to those who suggest that this is a futile exercise to do the international and comparative. Is there any other argument you'd make to the naysayers?
Well, I think you mean you're saying why study international crime?
Yeah, there are people who say that.
I think it's the only way you really get a perspective on what looks like homegrown stuff from an outside view, and I think that we don't have enough right now to be able to compare it. I think my Swiss study, it does have a chapter with some of it. It has, I think, great implications for crime control in this country. And I think that, but again, you can do it partly within your own country. We have areas of the United States which have, if you want to look at it as a mixed culture, people live in them. People who live in an inner city and slums and everything that have a low crime rate. The Japanese used to live in an area of low crime, some areas, and had a relatively low. On the whole, I think the Jews have lived in areas like that, kept it low. I mean, we do have the possibility, but I'm a great person in comparative research because these are natural experiments. Whether it's a nation or within a culture, why some have high and some have low.
This may be a somewhat of an unusual question, but you know, everyone talks about culture shock, and there's culture shock both ways. And with all the traveling that you do and all of the experiences that you've had, what were some of the unique kinds of experiences you had? What were some of the culture shocks that you learned along the way?
Culture shocks I learned along the way? Well, that's a tough one. Obviously, the ones that influence you most are in a developing country, and I would say that that's too tough to answer. I think it's a good question, but it's not tough. I mean, for example, India is, to me, after all these visits, is like another planet. Things are so different. The music, the dress, the style, the customs, the way of greeting people, everything like that is, of course, a culture shock, and people who go to another culture often either hate it or love it. The thing is it's different. And I think that I suppose the culture shock, most of it is different. But I will say this, while I've lived abroad, traveled abroad, work abroad, I must say the return to my own country is, to answer your question, I've been asked that before, is the biggest culture shock.
Right.
Because again, like with crime, when I go on these trips abroad, and particularly where I stay out a long time, a year, maybe years, even 2 or 3 months, when I come home to my own country, I see my own country completely different and see things in it and see a world that I had not, like they say the fish in a goldfish in a tank doesn't know there's water in there, and I'm so used to it. And I do think that the biggest culture shock, I think, in answer to your question, is for me, and that is a culture shock, when I come home from an experience in either can be in Europe but developing country, how my own country, its custom, its behavior, some good, some bad, comes home with a big thing. So I'm a great believer in travel, but I don't mean that seeing the grand tour like many people do, going around Europe for a day or two in a hotel. I mean by, I even think a period of a month in a country gives you the kind of thing I'm talking about. A year is very good.
Let me just ask you one final question, and that is, you know, how would you like your international work to be viewed? What do you believe has been the major contribution that you have made to comparative and international criminology?
Well, I suppose that I hope it stimulated some people. I gather that in your case it was a stimulus. I hope it stimulated some people. I think hopefully it's in some cases pioneer work. It'll encourage others to do that type of thing. Unfortunately, as I said before, every country is very ethnocentric anyway. But I think in the field of criminology, they tend to be extremely, they say the laws are different, customs are different, police are different, everything. You can't make studies of that type. I suppose the fact that in a country like Switzerland, which didn't at that time, it does now, have any national statistics, that in a rather closed society, that one can find out answers to things, that one can persuade officials, this now is pre-Amin, officials in Uganda to allow you to go into the prisons, to allow you to work in the police stations. You can, that way, I can see somebody else in, say, developing country in Africa who wants to do research in a police station or wants to do research in a foreigner in a closed society in the prisons, will say, well, Clinard did it. I can show you a book. He did it one time. And so I think that it's not just the information that mounts, it's the fact that you've been able to do something and show people how to do it, but the fact you've been able to do it is itself one of the major contributions. I've, you know, my more later work has been in the field of corporate crime. The fact that I took a considerable, fairly sized sample of retired middle management executives to talk about the crime and ethics of their corporations when they were very proud, required a great skill in getting them to do that. Some people say you cannot do research on corporate crime within a corporation, so I said, okay, I'll do it outside. Some people would say they won't talk, they won't cooperate, they'll falsify everything. Well, I showed it could be done.
Well, Marshall, you've been a way shower in many different aspects of criminology and criminological research. For me personally, of course, the area of the international and comparative has been the most important. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear your experiences and perceptions in it, and I do believe that you will continue to be a stimulant for many people to come because of the significant work that you've done. So it's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.